Hello everybody and welcome to this edition of the Conscious Change Agent web show. I'm your host, Jack Butler, and the Conscious Change Agent web show is where we bring you conscious change agents, people who are mastering the paradigm of inner awareness and outer effectiveness. One such person is my guest today, Lisa Wimberger, and she is the founder of the Neurosculpting Institute. She holds a master's degree in education from the University of Stony Brook, New York, and a foundation certificate in neuro leadership. Lisa studied ascension training for 4 years with the Shire monks, and she completed 4 years of psychic awareness training, applying the tools of the Berkeley Psychic Institute. She's the author of the acclaimed New Beliefs, New Brain, Free Yourself from Stress and Fear. She's a neuroplastician running a private practice teaching clients who suffer from stress disorders. She's facilitated leadership training for executive teams in Fortune 500 companies and the Colorado Department of Healthcare. As a public speaker, she's addressed audiences ranging from corporate leaders to, and this is particularly cool, the FBI and the Secret Service. She's a member of the National Center for Crisis Management and the International Law Enforcement Educators and Trainers Association. Lisa's mission is to share practical and powerful stress management techniques to those in need, and this caused Lisa to develop her neurosculpting programs, which combine neuroscience principles with mindfulness and energetic modalities. Lisa, I admire your work. It's fantastic to have you on the show.
Thank you. That was a mouthful.
Well, when you people have done so many things, you know, you've got to get it all in there. So, congratulations on you.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be here.
Well, let's wind back the clock a little bit. So before you got into all the great things we just talked about there, I remember the first time I met you, you were speaking at a conference, and you said that you'd started meditating as a teenager, and I thought that's pretty cool. So let's start there. How did you come across meditation, and what got you into that?
Yeah, I had a brother in college, and he is 8 years older than I am. So he was in college, and I was 12, and he had come home this one day and said, "Oh, I just learned this really cool meditation technique from my professor. You want to learn it?" Good. And I don't think I knew what meditation was at the time, but he always shared cool stuff with me.
Yes.
So I thought, yeah, that sounds great. And he taught me a very simple technique, and just instantaneously I knew I was supposed to do that. And I had no words to describe that draw, other than it just felt really natural. So I just began to use that technique 2-3 times a day, very, very religiously, kind of. Yes. Every night I would do it before bed, and I really, really just felt this amazing engagement in a fantasy world. And I would then do it right after school and then before bed. And then sometimes I would do it, 3 times a day, where I set a space and I would go in my room and close the door and go off into this world, and I loved it. And I still use that technique today, that early technique that I learned, and I was like a fish to water.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. It's a kind of natural thing. Yeah. And one of the other things I didn't mention in your bio is that you've also nearly died several times. Yes. Just fill me in on that.
Yeah. Well, I have flatlined on 3 documented occasions, but I know it's probably between 5 and 7 from my own experience. It's pretty crazy. I had always gravitated to the freeze response in stressful situations. There's fight, flee, and freeze. Yes. Freeze is where you just, you hold the breath and you just get stuck. I always had that predisposition, but I got hit by lightning when I was 15 on my birthday. And that, where were you? I was in Pennsylvania with some friends, and I grew up on the East Coast in New York, but we were out at my friend's house, and a storm came in, and we took shelter under a porch, and I was leaning against the garage door, and the metal handle was across the back of my spine, and the side of the house got hit, and it came out through me and catapulted me off the garage and into the dirt along with the boy next to me. And we were all in shock, and all the friends were watching, so I didn't really make sense of it, and I seemed okay, but that's the summer I started having the blackouts. And so I would have blackouts at random times, where I would just feel the world going away, and I would faint, is what I was calling it. And as I got a little older, in my later teens, those spells got worse. So they would happen a lot when I was alone. And by the time I was probably 18 or 19, I was waking up in puddles. I would go into the bathroom and I would just feel the world about to disappear, and I would hear myself say, "Oh no," and then I'd be gone. And I'd wake up in a puddle, not knowing how much time had passed, not knowing, did I urinate? What is this puddle I'm in?
Yeah.
I don't know what's happening. And then I would crawl back to my room and not say anything.
So this was all going on?
This was going on a lot of times by myself. Although my parents did know I had some fainting spells, they took me to a doctor. They did a blood test for I don't know what, but they said, "You're fine. It's low blood sugar, it's low blood pressure, maybe you're hormonal." No explanation. But they got worse and worse. And they would come during times of stress or a fear that I couldn't even name. But the world would go away, and as I got older, they were harder to recuperate from. I couldn't move for hours and had to lay in bed, and then eventually I had to lay in bed for 24 hours before I even had strength. So I got my diagnosis in a doctor's office. This was the first documented time that I flatlined. I was in a routine exam, and I told the doctor that I felt faint. I'm going to pass out, and he said, "Okay." And I thought I passed out like I usually do. It's very familiar to me. And then I woke up to the needle of atropine right above my heart, like that scene out of Pulp Fiction. And the doctor's panicked, and he's telling me, "Breathe, breathe." And I'm looking at him thinking, "What are you doing? There's a needle right there." And he said, I said, "Did I pass out?" He said, "You had a seizure and you flatlined. You weren't breathing, your heart wasn't beating, and I was about to inject adrenaline, which is what atropine is, right into your heart." And I went, "Are you kidding me?" And he said, "No." And I said, "Well, what's the puddle?"
I'm just remembering the scene in Pulp Fiction.
Yeah, right? And I said, "What's the puddle?" He said, "Well, when you seizure, you release all this energy out of your muscles." And I looked at him and I said, "Well, but this has been happening since I was 15. So the first documented time I flatlined was in his office, but I think it may have happened far more than that, before that documentation. Then there were two other really bad episodes. One was in a public food court with my daughter when she was 3. And the paramedics had to come for that one and took me to the hospital, and I knew they weren't going to find anything because it's not epilepsy, and it was just these strange, they call it syncope, fainting spells. But mine was to the point where I would stop everything. And then
still undiagnosed?
Well, it's kind of sort of, but the last time it happened where I realized I have to rewrite this script in my brain. There's a script signaling my nervous system to hit the freeze response in a reptilian manner that causes me to play dead. Which really in mammals can cause you to die. It's great if you're an amphibian. It's great if you're a lizard. It's not great if you're a mammal because you shut everything off. So the last time it happened, with my husband present, he had to get me breathing 3 separate times during that recovery, which was far more work than I had ever had to do to come out of it. And then I just could lay in bed for days. And at that point, I decided, well, I need to rewrite the script. Because I had no name for what was triggering me. I just knew I had mechanisms that I now understood the flow of those mechanisms. So now let me go write a new script to create a cascade of different mechanisms so that I don't do this again. So that's a very long answer for the flatlining, but it's key in why I've created neurosculpting is because I've had to sculpt literally a brand new script and entrain it so that when I feel an episode coming, my nervous system doesn't go to the default script and cause me to die, that I go to a new script which causes me any of the other normal responses to fear that I could have.
Well, so let's go into that. So what is neurosculpting?
So neurosculpting is a modality born out of my own personal need to save myself. I've had formal meditation training, which was fabulous, but I didn't know how to apply that to what was going on in my body, I knew I could use the meditation to cope. I knew I could use the meditation to help me make sense of the world when I would wake up.
Yeah.
But not how to craft a new autonomic response. And I knew I needed to do that so I didn't have another episode. So the neurosculpting was my journey to get educated as much as I could on the brain and the nervous system and how that worked in conjunction with our thoughts, our
Yes.
fear, and our stress. Once I got a better understanding of that dynamic, then I realized I could target certain activity or initiate certain activity in my brain that would prime my brain to map and glue a new story in much better than if I didn't prime my brain. So an example, when you're stressed and you're in your fight or flight mode and you're not in learning something new mode, you're in
Yes.
and someone tells you, oh, just calm down. It'll be better soon. That doesn't work.
Yes.
You meet that with resistance. You meet that not willing to map to that suggestion.
Yes.
So I knew that's how I was coming to the world. So I would use my understanding of the brain to prime the brain so that it was about to buy or map a new story.
Yep.
And then I would tell the new story very strategically to engage both my left hemisphere and my right hemisphere archetypal qualities so I could have my whole brain involved. And that new story was a script.
Yeah.
And I'd rehearse the script over and over in this learning environment so I could entrain it. And what I perceive happened was that I rehearsed that particular script so much that the last time an episode came on, I automatically, it wasn't even conscious, I automatically chose the other fear reactions in my toolbox, which was fight and flee.
Mm-hmm.
And so I scripted enough and rehearsed it enough that I didn't choose freeze. For the first time in 27 years, I interrupted an episode.
Yeah.
So that's where neurosculpting came from.
So what's the synthesis of ancient and modern? Because I know you've done a lot with meditation and mindfulness techniques, and at the same time you're with the kind of latest developments in neuroscience, and I think you're saying that they're often saying similar things, or we can map them together. Like, what is the extent of that overlap?
For me, I'm using a lot of the meditational principles that never change.
Yes.
That is, if you put consciousness to observing your thoughts, you then can affect a change in those thoughts and dissociate or unattach from the ego hold that those thoughts are who you are. That's the ancient piece that as I've understood it, is kind of a principle of a lot of the meditation world.
Absolutely.
So I took that and I applied current neuroscience explanations of how we learn as a framework or an architecture to that idea that we're not our thoughts.
Yeah.
And so if the idea is that we are not our thoughts, that they're just pictures, and we can apply a framework that allows us to embody that and use that in a way to affect our neurology, well, that's what I want to do. I don't want the theory that I'm not my thoughts. I want the practice that I'm not my thoughts. And for me, maybe I needed some baby steps where other meditators don't necessarily need what I needed. And those baby steps were, teach me how to embody this amazing concept, which is I'm not my thoughts. I'm more than that. I'm not just this body. I'm an infinite spirit. Yeah. I don't know how to put that into the real world.
Yes.
But the framework that worked for me to understand that more and embody it more was the neuroscience. Oh, this is what my thoughts are doing to hijack that concept. And this is what my thoughts are doing to support it. Okay, so how do I trick my brain into being here more?
Yes.
It's tricks of the brain to engage different parts consciously. And for me, that's the fusion of ancient wisdom and a modern technology.
Yeah. So in terms of the brain, is all of the brain equally neuroplastic? Like, is it all equally even trickable to use?
I don't know that we can say anything for sure about the brain because it's so not understood yet. We're just at the surface.
Okay.
But there certainly are parts that are showing high neuroplastic abilities. So for instance, the hippocampus, where we theoretically store our long-term memories, yes, which is the part of the brain that's damaged in Alzheimer's patients who can't make new memories. That part of the brain is actually very related to neuroplasticity because neurogenesis happens there. The birth of new brain cells happens in the hippocampus, yeah, which science didn't even know was possible in the last century. Yeah. So that's a real plastic part. However, there's also a case, she's a little girl on a TED Talk right now. I think she's 5. I forgot her name. She had half of her brain removed due to, I think it might have been seizures or tumor, I can't remember, but she's migrated so many of the missing hemispheres capabilities into the remaining hemisphere that I would say her whole brain is neuroplastic.
Wow.
So I don't know if we could...
So just to be clear on this, that's to say functions that are, for example, typically seen as left brain functions, she's been able to get them through purely kind of like having a right brain.
Yes.
That's interesting.
Yeah, and even Michael Merznick did, he was a researcher that did great work understanding neuroplasticity. He did these studies where, on apes, where you could, bind the hand or bind the fingers together, and then suddenly what was at one time 2 neurologically distinct maps in the brain for each digit fused and became one map in the brain that represented now 1 digit, and then he would unbind them, and then the monkey would have to have the brain remap over time to then separate that 1 map and become 2 digits in the brain again. Huh. So we're exercising neuroplasticity all the time. We just usually map to old defaults or repetition, so we don't realize we're mapping. But if we could pay attention to our ability to map and harness all of those brain resources to map to new and intentional things, then we could shift a lot.
Yeah. Yes, it's a bit facetious. It's reminding me of I just recently, I don't even know why I rewatched Terminator 2 the first time in like 12 years. Because, but there's this part where the Terminator's dead, and then the brain manages to find like a rewiring, and he kind of comes back to life, and it's like there's actually something inspiring about just remembering the ability of the brain to generate itself and find new ways of making meaning and things possible. Mm-hmm. So with the left brain and right brain, that's fairly kind of societally understood. Most people have a sense when you say, "Oh, I'm more of a left brain person." Sometimes the left brain would be more linked into, say, analysis, maybe right brain more empathy. And I know you've also done interesting like blog posts around if you're more likely to tune into one of those things, how can you start to tune more into the other? Like, how do you actually do that? How possible is it for people who are predominantly into one hemisphere? I know you've given the example of the young girl there, but like, what's the best protocol for people?
Well, it's interesting because, again, with the brain, these blanket statements are never accurate, but they're what we know. They represent as much as we know right now. Yes. So archetypally, the left brain is involved in those very concrete concepts like language and analysis, and our ability to read and understand that symbols equal letters, equal words, equal concepts. Yes. And then archetypally, the right hemisphere is associated with creativity and abstract thought and the overwhelming feeling that you can't articulate when you look up at the stars and you're just unable to label that. Yes. So these are the archetypes. And it's interesting because we have a left hand and a right hand. Yep. And yet most of us don't get annoyed when we use one over the other. Yes. However, Those who associate themselves with the left brain world get annoyed at right brain archetypes. Sometimes it's difficult for them to communicate.
Yes.
Where scientists and artists are at odds.
Yes.
Where scientists say, I need proof and I will not accept your reality until I have data. Yeah. And the artist will say, you don't need data, you should just have the experience, and we create conflict. And the irony is, we both have left and right hemispheres.
Yes.
It's like saying left-handed people are at odds with right-handed people, or even with ourselves. Every time I pick up something with my left hand, my right hand doesn't get annoyed. It doesn't demand the left hand show me how that worked.
Yes.
It's interesting that we segregate parts of our brain as though one were better than the other. And this has been my quest, is to get both hemispheres of my brain communicating in a supportive way. Mm-hmm. And this is also why I get really frustrated with the segregation of the science world and the experiential or the artistic world. It doesn't make any sense to me. It's like we're fighting with our own archetypes in our heads.
Yes.
So ways to get them to talk. Through the neurosculpting, I've intentionalized the process so that when I guide the meditations, I'm eliciting both a left brain and a right brain association inside of the storyline, so that as the participant, you're going back and forth the whole time.
Mm-hmm. What's an example of that?
So an example is if I'm guiding a meditation and I say to you, think of the idea of fear. Think of the word and what it means. Think of a specific moment in time when you were in fear. You're typically using a left brain property.
Yeah.
You're thinking of a word, a definition, a concept, and then you're remembering an identity moment of you in fear.
Yeah.
That's typically left brain. Then I'll say in the meditation, now if that could be any color or vibration or texture in the whole spectrum, what might that look like? Now you go into an abstract world of thought.
Yes.
And now you're choosing this random or abstract color. And then for the rest of that mini dialogue, I have you work with the abstract.
Yeah.
And then the next prompt will have you go back into an archetypal left brain thought. And then I bring it into an archetypal right brain. And I'm doing that the whole time I'm guiding, so we're not stuck in one version or the other.
Yeah. That's interesting, because the second part of that is always the bit that I've found harder when I'm being led in meditation, or someone's using visualization in a program. Mm-hmm. That's it's much less native to me than being able to just say, remember a time when you felt like.
Right. So that's an exercise right in the meditation of you practicing having right brain thoughts kick in concert with left brain thoughts.
Yeah. So just to pick up on the language of neurosculpting, because this sculpting to me implies something that's quite self-created, and I just wondered, in my work I talk about the both directing and allowing. How can you both be like, I'm going to make stuff happen, I make life happen, which is a kind of directing kind of orientation, and then the kind of perhaps the more New Age style orientation, which is, let's allow, let's accept, let's surrender, let's just respond to what wants to come through. Mm-hmm. So where does sculpting fit within that? How much is it you saying, okay, brain, I kind of know what I need here, so I'm going to write a script and you can play along? Or where does that fit with actually just, allowing what is and the kind of...
That's a great question. I think the sculpting is really important so that you create a new platform to allow new things. Okay. It's both. So, for instance, if I have a whole bunch of default scripts that might be very subconscious, but they're dictating how I view the world, then all I can allow to come in is that which can be recognized by the platform I've created. Yeah. So I'm limiting my allowance quite a bit. But if I strategically sculpt an add-on to that platform, or an expansion of that platform, then I can allow for a lot more recognition of what the universe wants to give me.
Yeah.
but I have to sort of undo deeper layers so that I could allow and recognize more. So I think the sculpting is a balance. I don't want to spend all my time directing everything in my brain. Yeah. I can't, first of all. Yeah. My conscious mind is only 5%, so it's an illusion to think I can, but I want to spend some time directing. Intentionalizing is the word I will use. Yeah. And I want to spend a lot of time allowing for new recognition to come from what I've just sculpted.
Yeah. So that makes a lot of sense to me. Yeah. Yeah, it kind of seems a bit like if you spend time working hard to make sure that you're healthy, there's a whole set of things that you can do off the back of that, which an unhealthy body and therefore probably an unhealthy brain would just not have receptivity to.
Absolutely.
So let's talk a little bit about some of the groups that you work with, because you've worked with some pretty cool groups. So I don't know, let's say I'm a police officer. What sort of things would you consider to do with me?
Oh, the police, near and dear to my heart. So I've been working with police since 2007.
Yeah, and what got you into that?
It's a really crazy story, but I'll tell it because it's good. So I was doing sort of neurosculpting and facilitating this sort of stuff at the corporate level, and I have family back home in New York, that's NYPD. Yeah. And I had been working the year before with my cousin who was young and depressed because there was a lot of vicarious trauma that his father, an officer, was bringing home. And so I worked with him a little bit, and I thought, gee, if I could have gotten to the father, I wouldn't have had to work with the son. Yes. So that was sort of the first light bulb. And then the second light bulb is the part that is the inexplicable drive. I was coming home from work twice in 1 week, and both times this vision or idea or mental imagery came at the same intersection. I drove through an intersection and got this image of a cop, a generic cop, putting a vagrant into the back of the patrol car and pulling his hands off, and black was just crawling up his arms, approaching him this way as though it were suffocating him, and he was just crying, just streaming tears. And this same image happened twice that week at the same intersection, and I thought, well, I better not ignore that. So I started researching the industry and what they had in terms of any kind of stress or wellness work. They had very little. So my research propelled this mission further because I realized they have nothing in place to deal with the amount of trauma they deal with, which is why they burn out so quickly. It's why they have the highest suicide rates. It's just a whole...
Police have the
highest suicide rates out of any profession. The statistics last year from the National Suicide Foundation for Police was that in America last year or 2 years ago, about 56 officers died in the line of duty and 480 committed suicide. So the disparity is tremendous. And now all of those stats are up to speculation, but one thing that increases that is that when an officer commits suicide after retirement, it's not necessarily reported as an officer suicide because they're no longer officers.
True.
So those factors don't even weigh in, and that happens a lot too. So this mission started bubbling up in me, and I knew I rewrote my trauma. I knew I could help those in deep trauma, and I'm not a therapist, and so I didn't have that angle. I just knew I could teach someone how to meditate this way.
Yeah.
And that's when I started my campaign to reach officers. And so to an officer, I would start with the physiological, which is, here is what your body does in a stressful moment or a stressful thought, whether you believe it or not. This is what's happening at your hormonal level. Mm-hmm. This is what's happening at a neurotransmitter level. This is what is happening in your nervous system. They can't refute that.
It's unarguable.
Yeah. So I start there with them, and then I teach them how to create an off button for all of the on that they've done with adrenaline and cortisol to their bodies. So that's how I work it with them.
Yeah.
I'm going to teach you the off button.
And what does that look like? Like, is that a is that a meditation? Is it a mantra? Is it a
No, it's a couple powerful meditations, but that usually doesn't come in until I've spent about 2 hours covering the physiological relationship between thoughts, stress, and the body.
Yeah.
If I start with meditation, I'm out of there.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's the balance between someone using that, say, like as a police person at the end of their day so that they can kind of like unwind versus something that people can literally do the moment that a stress response or something comes up? Because I'm presuming, I don't know so much about the police. My previous business was working with teachers. Teachers often have over 1,000 interactions a day, and it's boom, 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 and then non-stop. So sometimes, again, waiting to the end of the day, it's better than nothing, but it's like we need something in process.
Well, again, it's about how much you rehearse the script before it automates. Yes. So we could use the script or the meditation as a way to relax at the end of the day. And if we do that regularly, or if we exercise this particular technique to equate to this particular state of being, and we rehearse that enough, we can automate it, which is what I did with my own response. I had to rehearse that script enough so that that was an automated default response in the moment. Yeah. That's different for everybody. So some people can create and rehearse and entrain things more quickly than others. So for the officers, the first place I start with is do this every day, just to bring down those hormonal levels of stress in the body so that you can sleep. Yeah. From there, I teach people how to use it in the moment. Mm-hmm. And then with the neurosculpting comes a whole layer of tricks or triggers that you can use with the body to wire in moments of those states so that you could be triggering yourself all day long to access these states. And that's the gift of neuroplasticity is that neurons fire when we have a thought or do an action or anything that'll be a neurological firing. Yes. Well, Hebb's law is that neurons that fire together wire together. So for instance, if I put the bowl of food in front of the dog and he salivates and I ring the bell at the same time, I've got the neurological firing of the salivation and the hunger. I've got the neurological firing at the same time in the audio cortex when it hears the bell. Neurons that fire together wire together. You can now ring the bell and the dog will salivate. Right. So we do that with neurosculpting all day long. So what I do is I give trigger words for the meditations. I let the individual come up with a word that they now associate with that whole experience. And then the next day, during the day, you could create a moment of focused, heightened attention where your neurons are firing and saying, oh, this is new and exciting. And then you could bring up that reference word and start firing those two things together. Yeah. If you could do that all day long, then on some level you're exercising this meditation experience that you've labeled. You're giving it a little exercise all day long. Yeah. So you can program quicker that way. That's how I did it for me.
I don't know how familiar you are with NLP. That sounds very much like anchoring, like you taking something and you're creating the same response, so you're training the physiological responses. Is it the same?
I don't know much about NLP except for all my students say, "Wow, that's like NLP." Oh, okay. So I'm guessing it is similar.
Yeah. So one of the things that I talk about in my work is how most of the personal development world is geared to helping people out of victimhood into some sense of control or like authorship for your life. So rather than feeling at the whim of life, you have the sense that you're creating your reality, and therefore if you change your thoughts, you can change your reality, or if you change your goals, you can change your reality. One of the things I was interested in, that you did a blog post that suggested that there's actually like a reward process going on in the brain that's different from a kind of state of victimhood versus a state of being in control or being in autonomy. And I'm just kind of curious that it seems like maybe neuroscience is backing up what has been a fairly sort of, I guess, fundamental psychological teaching for a while.
Absolutely. There's a lot of research in what they're calling the social brain. And what neuroscience is finding is that a social sense, or not even a social sense, a sense of autonomy contributes much better to an ability to regulate your negative thoughts and your stress than a sense of victimhood. And it's actually linked even to pain management. There was this really great study done. Analgesics are pretty fairly well studied in the world of neuroplasticity. And the study was done where they had two groups of, I don't know if they were terminal patients or not, but they were high pain patients in a hospital. And it was a morphine study where one group was given a self-administering button for morphine to deal with their pain. And another group was told that if they felt pain, they would have to ask the doctor, and the doctor would administer the pain medication. And in the study, what was found is that those who had to ask for permission to have the pain medication reported 2/3 more pain and need for morphine, and those who could self-administer with a sense of autonomy actually felt less pain. And even studies in rats where they'll have rats try to balance on a little, I guess it's a log or a stick in water, and the rats will fall in. Well, very quickly, once the rats fall in, they develop a very quick sense of victimhood, so that the next time they go out onto the log, they actually just dive in the water and drown themselves. So the sense of victimhood really keeps us in a neurological framework that views the world as negative. It keeps us viewing the world in a dependent way, and so we feel very subject to the world versus feeling like a navigator through the world, where if you have even a perceived sense of autonomy and control helps immensely, which is part of why reframing situations works so well to manage stress, is because in the reframing of either the language or the thought, you are giving yourself a perceived sense of control, even if it's little. And that helps bring down that fight or flight response, that fear response, which is also mapped to a negative view of the world.
That makes a lot of sense to me. I've often had lumbar spine pain, and the times where that's been worse, and then I've taken on a stretching regime protocol, even if that itself hasn't completely solved the problem, just that knowledge that I have a practice that is really supporting me in this, rather than I don't really know where to go with this, I've been to XYZ and no one's quite got the solution for me, so that that cycle of I'm not really sure when this pain is going to end.
Right.
And, I can totally relate to that.
What's the best way for people to connect with you and your work if they're interested in what you're up to?
The best way to connect with me is through the Neurosculpting Institute. So we have a very robust website. It's neurosculptinginstitute.com. And on that website, there are a number of goodies, I like to say.
There are.
There's some goodies. One that I'm really excited about is our free library. And my whole mission is for people to learn in their own way about all of this technology, this mental technology that can support an empowered life. And that doesn't have to come through me. So on the website, the free library is loaded with current science articles, neuroscience abstracts, mindfulness abstracts and research studies, suggested reading list, and I just load it, and it's all for you for free. So if you click on that, you can create a special login, and you are free to view and read any of those articles. Right now, there's about 300 articles. We also have the neurosculpting notes, which are tidbits. So if you don't want to read a whole article, but you want to read a paragraph that implies an idea that you can maximize on or practice, and then links you to either an author or a work that might be associated with that, or even a video description, that's what those notes are for. And then you can, of course, go to the calendar of classes and come take a class with us. That'd be the best. And you could do that in person or via live stream. And now in the next coming week, which will already be long before this comes out, is our on-demand platform where you can just register and sign up for a class, and you can watch it at your leisure. And we're going in that direction. So there's a lot of ways you can find out about how this work fits for your life. And you can also decide if you want to read and have the experience of trying some of these techniques on your own first. You can get New Beliefs, New Brain. It's available on Amazon and Kindle and any online ordering platform for books, and any retail store that sells books can order it for you. And that's a great entry point because it gives the how and the why. And it also gives a part 2, which is 6 guided meditations. Some of them I created, and some of them are techniques I learned through the Interconnection Institute, where I studied the Berkeley curriculum. Yeah. So they're not all my original techniques, but they're in the neurosculpting framework, which made them go much deeper. And that's a great way to test out if you're comfortable with this material.
Yeah. So that website again, neurosculptinginstitute.com. So we're coming to the end of our time together, just kind of casting forward to the future. Well, actually, I want to do that second. First thing is, you were just mentioning earlier about use of like non-dominant hands as a way of just kind of like triggering mindfulness. Right. And I just wondered if you could just say something very quickly to that, because I found that like illuminating, but also just it's kind of like crunchy. And for someone who doesn't necessarily want to always spend their time in the meditation hall, and who's very interested in meditation in action amongst a busy schedule, that seemed to talk to me. So.
Yeah. So in the morning, try this at home. It's very funny. Try brushing your teeth. Try brushing your teeth with your non-dominant hand. And I promise you're going to have to pay attention. When I first started doing that, I stabbed myself multiple times and had toothpaste all on my cheeks.
Yeah, disclaimer, nothing sharp. Yeah.
So when you use your non-dominant hand in a very benign way that's non-threatening, your brain says, oh, I have to pay attention here, and you go into a moment of heightened attention. That's learning.
Yes.
That's a ripe mapping environment. So if you were to do that, and while you did that, take 3 seconds to think a better thought for yourself, a positive thought, or even reference a meditation you had labeled at one point. But if you choose a positive thought at that moment, you're now linking that positive thought to a moment of heightened attention where you're going to map that experience. You can do that all day long.
Yeah.
You can program all day long. Don't cut vegetables with your non-dominant hand, or anything with a knife if your non-dominant hand. That's going to defeat the purpose.
Yes, or if it's like a tennis champion.
Yeah, you want to have it be a benign exercise, like brushing your hair, brushing your teeth, and something simple.
And that moment of heightened awareness, is that what you called it? Mm-hmm. Like, how desirable is it to be in that place, like, throughout the day? You know, it's like, if that's optimal learning, like, can we entrain ourselves to be there all the time? Or
I suppose we could, but I also like to take my breaks where my brain is just coasting and I'm not really directing.
Yes.
So I guess it's for the individual to decide how much he or she wants to be there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if anyone's intrigued listening to this and thinking, yeah, I'm up for the sort of gauntlet that you're throwing down, what would you invite people to consider or take away, or what's the kind of call to action?
The call to action is, you know how you felt when you were learning something exciting and brand new. You know that a lot of other smaller annoyances disappeared when you were learning a new skill that really excited you, reading a new book, talking with a new community, or engaged in a brand new topic. That's your real-time litmus test for how this works. When your brain is learning, we don't have to sweat the small stuff because we're mapping to new, and we're firing up all sorts of amazing growth hormones and healing in the brain. So my call to action is go do something new that doesn't threaten you. Pick up a new book, go join a new group, learn a new activity, do something brand new, and notice how easy it is for you during that time to not sweat the small stuff.
Fantastic. Well, you heard it here. Don't sweat the small stuff. Lisa, thanks for spending time with me here today. I've really enjoyed our conversation. Best of luck with the great work that you're doing. Keep it up. And yeah, I love the way that you kind of combine the spiritual stuff with just the kind of make it happen feistiness as well. So,
Great, thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks.
good luck.
Thanks.
Cheers.